translation in the entertainment sector. My name is Jorge CINTAS from University College London, and I've been tasked with chairing this session for just 1 hour in here. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce audiovisual translation as a sort of topic. You know, quite a few things have been said in previous panels, but I think it's always been conspicuously missing in some of the debates that we have taken or have taken place here in TEF. So it's very pleasing to see how audiovisual translation is making more waves at other levels as well. In this sense, I would like to give you a few statistics to trickle your minds a little bit, and then we'll move on to the speakers. I was just checking recently on YouTube on their own statistics, and to give you an idea, every minute of our lives there is about 500 hours of video material that is uploaded to YouTube. And YouTube is only just one of the many video providers on the internet, and competes quite well with Vimeo. So it gives you an idea on how much material is audiovisual and is being circulating around. There's a company called Cisco, and they think about what might happen in the future, and some of their statistics are pretty amazing as well. You know, video traffic globally will be around 82% of all the communication that we have in the future on the internet. By 2022 will be, as I said, in video. And then the amount of video on demand traffic by 2022 as well will be the equivalent of 10 billion DVDs per month. So that's the amount of audiovisual material that we're going to be consuming. But if you think those figures are mind-boggling, they are dwarfed by the video game industry. The video game industry has earned more revenue than the movie and the music industry together, and every year consecutively for the last 8 years. And by 2021, in a couple of years' time, video games will be generating an estimate of $180 billion compared to the cinema film industry, which will be a mere 51 billion, and music 22 billion. So we're talking about big business and big money in this industry. And I'm very pleased to have three excellent speakers and very knowledgeable in different areas. So we're covering video games, we're covering as well broadcasting and cinema distribution. The first speaker is going to be Anca MARICA. She's been working in the video games industry for over 10 years, and she is currently a localization manager at Ubisoft, and with a special remit of the European, Middle East, and African market. Anca.
Hello, everyone. Okay, was that too loud? All right. Thank you, Jorge, for your nice introduction. And I will speak about video games localization. But before we start, I would like to ask you something. How many people do you think that play video games around the world? Can we have a Slido as well, please? Worldwide right now. All right, so please go to Slido. Some of you already did, and you can choose between the 4 options that you have there. All right. Waiting a bit for some more results. Many people voting. I will try not to influence your answers. All right. So if you haven't voted, let's move on because we have limited time. but I'm very pleased to see that most of you got the right answer. So yes, more than 2 billion people on Earth play video games one way or another. And in that context, you can imagine that video games localization plays a tremendous role. Good localization, great localization services means that over 2 billion people will get excited for new releases, they will stay loyal to beloved games, and of course, they will generate revenues. So, going to my slides, all right, I will give you some more data than what Jorge already gave you on the video game market, and then we will move on to speak about how we do localization at Ubisoft, what are some of our challenges, and how is our work received by the players. So, going back to the video game market, we saw together through Slido that the number of players is huge and it's actually growing every year. To be more exact, we are talking about 2.3 billion players. That's about a third of the world population. And these 2.3 billion players have generated last year for the video games industry an estimated of 122 billion euros. And to put that amount into perspective, and Jorge already gave you some details on that, you have in my chart the comparison with other sectors of the entertainment industry, more specifically books, cinema, subscription video on demand, music, and physical home video. And if we look more specifically to the territories that generate most revenues for the video game industry, you will see in the top 10 a lot of non-English speaking countries, of course, that contribute massively to these revenues. And just to name them quickly, of course, it's China, Japan, South Korea, Germany, France, Spain, or Italy. And every video game developer or publisher should do localization in order to be able to tap into those markets. All right, sorry. Moving on now more specifically to Ubisoft. And for those of you who are not familiar with the company, we are a French company created in 1986. We are one of the top publishers in the world. And at Ubisoft, we create worlds. Worlds which are engaging, meaningful, and fun for the player. And our role at localization is to make sure that these worlds are adapted to players around the world. Our mission? We provide the greatest gaming experience no matter where in the world you're playing. We want to give each player a unique experience that feels natural for his or her native language and culture. In terms of products that we localize, at Ubisoft we have a very diverse game portfolio and different game genres. So that means we can have a game set in ancient Greece, or we can have a game set in the apocalyptic future. You can have a dancing game, or you can have a sports or a racing game. And we need to make sure that our style in translation, in dubbing, or artistic direction is adapted to these different types of games. We cover all platforms from mobile to PC to VR to consoles. And in terms of size, we can have smaller casual projects, or we can have AAA. And if you don't know what a AAA game is, just think of the blockbuster from the movies industry and that will be your equivalent. And to understand a bit how complex a AAA game is for us, you can see some numbers on the screen for one game. Languages, 20 localized languages, out of which 9 will be dubbed. Word count, 600,000 words. I put there for comparison the beloved book of Charles Dickens, Great Expectations, which has 3 times less words. For recordings, 70,000 files to record per language and more than 100 actors per language. So if you do the math, you'll get an idea of all these resources that are involved only in the dubbing part, for example. And because it's easier to show you what I'm talking about, we'll try now to play a video. It's the intro from one of our recent AAA games, so hopefully it works. Let's see.
今までの私たちは全てを当然のように受け入れていた。朝のコーヒー、無料の Wi-Fi、それらを失ってからも私たちは生き延びた。
Le comunicazioni e i treni sono saltati, internet non ha funzionato più, ma siamo sopravvissuti.
لكن عندما تم نهب الصيدليات وأغلقت المستشفيات صار الربو قاتلاً.
Y sin la protección de la policía, ¿teníais algún arma? ¿Y vuestro vecino? Algunos sobrevivieron.
Wir sind eine zähe Spezies. Als unsere Gesellschaft zusammenbrach, fanden wir Wege weiterzumachen. Und nun, zum ersten Mal seit Jahrhunderten, ist das, was wir wollen, wirklich das, was wir brauchen.
Face à la catastrophe, nous nous sommes entraînés. Nous avons créé de nouvelles communautés sur les ruines de la société. Nous nous sommes adaptés. Nous avons établi la nouvelle normalité.
Mas há também aqueles que não constroem nada, não criam nada. Hienas abusando dos fracos. Fizeram nosso mundo sangrar.
Но мы не одиноки. Горстка храбрецов встала на нашу защиту. Они объединяют нас, ведь мы одна нация.
Son nuestro escudo, nuestra luz. Pero si esa luz se apaga,
who can save us then?
All right. You were able to hear all the languages in which this AAA game was dubbed. Of course, this is a version made specifically to showcase the localizations. If you play the game yourself, you won't be hearing all the languages at once. And you can imagine that behind such a big AAA production, there are a lot of challenges for us as localization, but we like to also see them as opportunities. And the first challenge I want to talk about is related to context and the fact that we are not able to send the game version, which is in production, to the translators during the translation phase. So that means the translator will work in text files, in CAT tool, and then it will be the localization tester to see everything in game and check any potential issues, and that feedback then goes back to the translator who can change accordingly. And the role of the localization tester is actually very important. I myself started as a localization tester 10 years ago at Ubisoft, and one of the bugs I still remember from that period, and I was testing Spanish, Jorge, it was a word which in Castilian Spanish had one meaning. It meant shell. However, that very same word had a completely different meaning for certain countries in Latin America. You guessed that it's an offensive one. I won't say the word. And you can imagine if that bug had reached the player, it would have put them and us in a very bad position. So this is why we encourage a very close collaboration between these resources, between the translator and the tester, to make sure that the version that reaches the player is correctly adapted linguistically and culturally. And going back to my process, sorry, this feedback cycle continues also after the release of the game. And this time we have a new stakeholder, which is the most important one, and I'm talking about the player, the end user. And we ask for feedback on the quality of the localization for the players, and this feedback is then sent to the translator, to the tester, and everybody involved to make sure that they can integrate this feedback into their work and to make it more adapted to what the player wants. The second challenge that I want to talk about is related to the type of content that we have, which is creative and which needs to be culturally adapted. So what we do in translation, we ask our translators to use, for example, cultural references or wordplays that are relevant for players in that target country. And it can even be the case that they would have to do transcreation in certain types of games. It's difficult for AAAs because you cannot really stay and change so much content. We do a complete review of the game content to make sure that there aren't any elements that could pose an issue to a certain culture. So it can be, I don't know, graffiti on a wall. It doesn't have to be in the text or in the audio. And for recordings, we use VIP actors to engage the players more. And we can even change the user interface, and this would be the case for Arabic, where we would have to mirror to adapt to the reading flow of the user from there. All right, now for the results. 90% of our players in the target countries, and this is an average that I did, use the localized versions. That means they want these versions, that they enjoy playing in their native language, and that it gives them a certain comfort and complete immersion in the game experience to be able to play in their native language. In terms of quality, I am proud to say that 97% of the players we surveyed are satisfied with the quality of the localization we provide, with 85% of them considering the localization quality to be high. Of course, we also get negative feedback, and this is an opportunity for us to improve, to innovate if it's the case. However, typically these negative replies are low, but it doesn't mean we're not here to listen. All right, now that you've walked with me a bit through the exciting world of video game localization, I hope that you found some information interesting, and maybe next time when you relax playing a video game, you will also think of the army of people that works behind to make everything possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anca, for extraordinary presentation, and the figures I can see already Slido getting hotting up in there. We're moving now from video games to the realm of broadcasting, and I've got the pleasure to introduce to you Nicolas BECKERS. He is the language service, the head of language services at ARTE, where he's in charge of all translations, dubbing, subtitling, interpreting meetings, and so on. And I was discussing a little bit on accessibility as well. And he's going to be talking to us about the experience of localizing products for the broadcasting world.
I'm going to speak French. It's different, it's good, so you can pick up your headphones if you want. c'est se faire applaudir sans n'avoir rien fait.
If you're applauded before you've done anything, that's already quite an achievement. I could have spoken German as well, but I have to choose one or the other.
Donc, ça a été dit.
So I'm Nicolas BECKERS. I'm head of the language service. I'm also a professional interpreter and translator, so I'm talking about things I do. I think that's interesting and does change the context in some way. Now I'm going to be talking to you about ARTE and how it works. It's a special television channel. It's binational. It's the only channel in the world which works with two countries, two cultures and two languages. You'll see extra languages on the screen, but it's important to say that this is a channel which thinks in various languages, which doesn't make things any easier, but it does make them more interesting. So we're publicly financed by French and German money, and we have three main centres. Strasbourg, the key centre, that's the French-German heart of it. We have ARTE France in Paris, so everything in France is in Paris, and in Germany in Banban. So we have this triple structure. We've been working for several years on cultural programmes, essentially. So this channel puts forward cultural programmes, and the idea is to bring people closer together. This has been done structurally for France and Germany, but there is this European vocation. We have a lot of European partners we work with. So it's flexible cooperation we have so that we can develop programs together. It's not a question of buying a Polish program or a Finnish program to broadcast them. We think together about what we can do together, different countries, different cultures, but we also always have this cross-reference, if you like. We're dealing with a subject, but from a different angle. If we talk about a French phenomenon, we're not going to be looking through the French prism alone. We'll have another angle on things, which makes our work more interesting, we believe. So that's the main aim of ARTE. Multilingualism is in ARTE's DNA. We created ARTE with two languages, so we always think in a bilingual way. And when we talk about ARTE programs, we think about the programs in different languages, French and German. When we discuss the programs, there are linguistic issues which arise before the program is created. So that's very interesting. From the beginning to the end, we have this bilingual look. We think about the culture and the language, which are inherently linked. So there are questions which arise very early on when we think about our programs. Issues relating to language, we do dubbing, voiceover, that's not a very French term, translating and subtitling. We do things internally, but also we outsource a lot of our services. If we had to do everything internally, ARTE would be one of the biggest organizations in Europe. We're just a small, modest, efficient channel. Most of the work is outsourced. We can't always do this internally. But once again, once we think about a program, we think about the form it could take. And in language terms, too, are we thinking about dubbing, subtitling? We think about the country, or the languages we want to work with. In the north of Europe, subtitling is used largely, but in France, for fiction, we need to have dubbing. So we need to take account of the features of each country. And I forgot to say that we have ARTE journalists working in French and German. They think about subjects from a cross-border point of view, and we have a team of translators who are journalists as well, and they And twice a day we have a news program in the 2 languages. News moves very quickly, so we have translators who have nerves of steel. When you go down to the newsroom, the journalists are very tense, and that might mean they're on the edge of a nervous breakdown. So it's an enormously stressful job, and I work as an interpreter and I know what's involved. Now, the web revolution, that's nothing new. That's behind us, but we can think about our way of operating. How do we react internally when we need to find solutions? When the web arrived, we found ourselves with new formats, new narration, and we didn't know how to create language workflows. We work with external companies. They said, you can't have a web program now, which is any different. So internally, we developed a system which was based on interpretation. We took media interpreters, that's a separate profession, and we trained them with sound engineers and technicians to use software, and with them we managed to very quickly create systems so that we could have voice over French, German, other languages. We could do that very quickly in 2 hours for a 5-minute video. And what we've been saying over the last 2 days is highlighted by this. We have put the interpreter at the heart of the process. This is a purely human process, but all of the technical system around was simplified, and this made it possible to come up with videos in a German or French version in 2 hours. Being able to react quickly is very important, and we were able to be more efficient than we were before. Now, to say what ARTE does, well, there are other people who do something similar. We need more languages, we have more platforms, and we have more formats. Traditional television is evolving, and if it doesn't do so, it will die. We're working with a lot more languages. We only had French and German initially, but now we are proposing Polish, English, Spanish, Italian for an ARTE program. That's on the internet alone. It's very difficult to have more channels in a structured way. It will be very complicated. It's complicated enough for France and Germany, so if we added others, it would be virtually impossible. So with trying to be flexible, we're trying to think about the internet programs we might put forward, which might be of interest to the target audience, and we need to take account of copyright, etc. And we need to have a selection of programs that we can put forward each year in languages other than French and German. We have more platforms, as I said. We communicate on different platforms in different ways. We don't use the same way of communicating as we do on the television. We have to change the communication when you change language, and we have to change it for the different platforms as well. So we have to leave this linear logic, this way of talking to people, which is always the same, and we need to adapt our way of communicating and our way of working so that we take account of the different media platforms. There's virtual reality, 360 degrees, and we need to think about a virtual space. How can we transmit information which isn't purely visual or auditory? How are we going to present information in one precise fixed place? Or should this appear and disappear as you pass in front? Are they subtitles? There's a lot of thought to be done on how we can communicate in different languages in a virtual space. It's sometimes very complicated when you don't have a virtual space, and it's even more complicated when you do. We have more formats as well. That's quite interesting. On the web, we have shorter content, perhaps for younger public, and when we work with external service providers, we need to make the translators and the people aware of the purpose of the product, who we're targeting. We need to think about the client-based approach. We've been saying this over the last couple of days. We're working for spectators, people who are navigating on the web. We need to meet their needs. We need to be clear about what they want, and our work is of key importance in this context. Artificial intelligence, will it overtake us? Well, that was something that was on ARTE. We've reached an advanced stage of our reflections. We're all thinking about what we can do with AI today, what we can't do. We've thought about different ways of dealing with it internally. Automatic translation, that doesn't work as far as we're concerned. It's a cultural sphere, cultural field. Words, sensitivities are very significant. We're still working with AI to see whether progress can be observed in this field. In some cultural sectors, though, we haven't got there yet. As we said yesterday, it's a waste of time and a loss of quality in the final product because you have a sort of straitjacket you feel constrained in. Artificial intelligence, automatic translation suggests something, but it's stifling us to some extent, and in order to get out of it, it's such an effort that it's almost counterproductive. Everything related to creativity cannot really be rendered by artificial intelligence. And then accessibility, how can we suggest programs in different ways for different publics? Let's be clear, all of this has to be done with funding which is not increasing. In the world and in Europe, there isn't an increase in television budgets. We have to make do with what we've got, and we have to do more with fewer resources. We've worked with the NHK in Japan to see whether there are possibilities of having avatars for sign language, to see whether synthetic artificial voices could work. We're thinking about automatic translation, transcription, etc. At the moment, we're testing this and thinking about it, but we need to keep a close eye on this, because if there is progress, we will be able to reach a broader audience in different languages, so we will have greater accessibility. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your attention.
De ce que vous faites à ARTE, mais aussi le défi.
Fascinating to hear what you do at ARTE and also the challenges that you face in audiovisual translation on television.
Now to English, and we are going to be seeing the last presentation here. We've sort of gone back in time, starting with video games, which is probably the newest form of communication. Digitally, we're going back to cinema, where everything started. And for this, we've got with us Will HACKETT-JONES. He is the managing director of Eclectic Translations, originally from the UK, but decided to find a more interesting life in the landscape of Russia, in St. Petersburg, where he is operating with his company. He works in different areas of translation, but particularly and especially in audiovisual translation and subtitling. Will?
Good morning. Could I have a show of hands? Who in here is a practicing translation professional? Okay, good heavens. And students? Okay, I thought there'd be more students. I hope I can still teach you something, but we'll see. Not teach, but impart. So, we're going to fly through this. We're going to look briefly at some of the trends, some of the specific challenges that one faces in subtitling. We're going to look at why we do this. There are various different whys depending on who you are, whether you're a client or whether you're the subtitler yourself. We'll have a look at a couple of films that we've done and the results that those films got. That would be, again, the why. Then we're going to look at the how. I'll try to spend a bit more time on that, and specifically a thing called reviewing, which, whilst it may be the cinema, may be the older part of this segment, reviewing, at least in the way we're doing it, is quite new because we made it up a couple of years ago. And then we'll look at a couple more examples of stuff that we've worked on, if we have time. I'd just like to say, as a little note of thanks, thank you very much to Angelika from the St. Petersburg Higher School of Translating and Interpreting. If it weren't for her, then I wouldn't have had the honor of being here in front of you today, and the very great honor of meeting the man whose research was behind the subtitling guidelines that we have created as a company. So I got to meet him, and I feel like a fanboy. So, for those of you that don't know, there is a very big thing going on in the world at the moment. There's a subtitling boom. Can anyone name one of the reasons why there might be a subtitling boom? Netflix. Yes. Oh, formatting. I like that. A second reason? Amazon. A third reason? Yeah, you got the point. This is happening. This is fantastic that it's happening because a huge amount of great content is now being produced because of these services. Massive amounts of people are now able to see things that were never able to see before, or if they were able to see them, they couldn't understand them. Now, the interesting moment is that a significant minority, and it is a minority, but nevertheless a significant one, is choosing what they view based on the quality of the language. That means that our work as subtitlers or as dubbers or translators for dubbing is genuinely felt and valued, and it turns into dollars in the pockets of Netflix, I suppose. Moving on. There are some very specific challenges. So the question really is, what makes a skilled subtitle translator? And it's not what makes a skilled translator of, shall we say, normal texts. Specifically technical competence, and those of you with a sense of irony will appreciate that my technical competence in presentations is limited because I managed to get the order of those screwed up. Never mind. I would say the first thing is a technical competence. Now, this may not have been the case a while ago, but nowadays with the speed of production, etc., you cannot not work in a specialized subtitling program. If you do, you need to know how to handle it well. You also need to know, again, I mentioned our subtitling guidelines, all of the elements that go into forming guidelines, which then form great subtitles. So you do require a degree of technical competence. A second one, this isn't, again, the case for many translators. We had a chap here from who translates for a bank. I doubt that the second part ever comes into the translation work that he does. We, however, have to be keenly aware of slang, of jargon, of the different degrees of swear words. And I would like to note that as translators, I get offended when translators are offended by words. I was invited to a conference earlier this year, and I sent them my presentation in advance. There was one swear word in it, because we deal with film, and there are often swear words in what we do, and I was uninvited from the conference. Yeah, exactly. So I would say you can't be afraid of the words, of the swearing, etc., etc. It's film. Who hasn't seen that kind of thing in film? And the third is definitely not what most translators have to be known for. This is paraphrasing. Because of the nature of subtitling, because of the nature of, for example, TV dramas, TV series, they tend to speak over each other the whole time. They speak very quickly. You cannot in any way get all of what they say on screen, so you have to paraphrase. You have to paraphrase hard. You also have to choose what to lose. Which of these words do we keep to maintain the flavor, and what do we just drop out because there's no time? So I'd say those are the main three ways how subtitle translation differs from normal translation. Let's look at why. Why do I do this? Hands up in here, who has read War and Peace? Oh, wow, not bad. Okay, who's read it in the original? Okay, very good. Who's watched a TV or film adaptation of War and Peace? Oh my God, there are more readers than viewers. That's a first. Okay, I should have guessed translation. Usually, it's far more people watching. There it was about equal. The reason I mention that is for deepening cultural understanding, sure, you can read books. There are a lot of very good books, etc., but it's a lot quicker and it's a lot more accessible if you just watch something. War and Peace, back to back, is going to be 6 days of reading and nothing else. Or you can watch it, and that might be 6 hours of entertaining viewing on a Sunday afternoon. So one of the reasons I do it is to help deepen cultural understanding. One of the reasons that producers do it is to obviously sell. We'll look at some numbers later. Also, they want to go and win awards, so things will go to festivals, they might go to competitions, the Oscars, etc. They might be looking to translate for co-production. Russia has just literally yesterday signed a bill to give 30 to 4% tax rebates to foreign filmmakers. This is very exciting for us because it means that we'll now be translating a lot more Russian English materials. And a big one, I feel, for times of particular political angst is humanizing others. We'll look at 2 films that I felt did this very much for Russia. And a fourth reason why I decided to talk about this today and why I think it's important to you is because of all the stuff yesterday and some of it today about machine translation. And if you want to stay afloat, I strongly feel that one of the ways of doing this is to get into the creative side, subtitling or script or book translation. So, cultural understanding. Everyone in Russia knows about this film, knows the chap on the right in that picture. He's essentially, I don't know, Russia's Elvis or something. There's graffiti everywhere that says, this guy is still alive, like there is, Elvis lives. So I got very excited when this project came to us last year, I think it was last year, because we got to take part in introducing Russian culture to the West. Russia has a deep and rich culture, but lately the politics has overtaken the culture, and I think that by doing the work we do, we can help win back some of the friendliness, the understanding between nations. This went to Cannes. It won the Cannes Soundtrack Award, which it should have done because it was a film about a musician, Victor Tsoi. Another film that we worked on a while ago, Leviathan. Leviathan caused a huge scandal in Russia because a lot of Russians were very upset with it. They thought that it was showing their country up in a bad light. Does anyone know where the original story for Leviathan came from? It was a true story about an American. But the scriptwriter took the story and placed it in Russia. What does that tell you? It tells you that all these kinds of stories, it's about a small man fighting the state, a big machine. It tells you that all these stories are truly international. And as a result, it was, I felt, a film very depressing, sorry, but it is. It didn't have a happy ending because it wasn't an American film. But it was an eternal story that transcends time and borders. Now, I know that at conferences people like numbers, but I like words, so I made some up for you. They're not entirely made up. If we look here, that is the ROI, the return on investment, received using my slightly dubious statistics. If you look at the third film down, sorry, there we go. It's in Russian. But the cost of the subtitles, there's the second column, $2,500. The takings in Russia, 1.3 million. Takings abroad, 1 million. 44% of the takings. They therefore had a 45,420% return on investment. So when somebody tells you, oh, the translation's a bit expensive, come on. ROI of 45,000. Okay. There is a little caveat. I understand that obviously they split the revenue with the cinemas, and then there was the cost of marketing and whatever, but, you know, as a kind of illustration. And humanizing others, a theme I mentioned earlier. Come and see. This was made by Mosfilm back in the late 70s, I think. Horrific film about World War II in Belarus. I wouldn't recommend watching it, not because it's not a good film, just because you'll be visually, your eyes will be scarred from watching it. But as an example of seeing the suffering of other people and helping us to understand each other through cultures, I thought it was wonderful. Also, we subtitled it because it had been restored, and it won the Venice Classics Award for Best Restored Film. So that was exciting to be involved in. How do we do it? It is time-consuming and laborious. Good heavens. We transcribe, we spot, we translate, we review. This is what I'm going to talk about for the last minute. Then we pre-edit and edit. Reviewing it exists as a concept in the ISO standards, but nobody explains what it is. I'll explain. At least this is the way we do it. The translator is the native speaker of the target language they translate. In film, because of all the slang and jargon, there's an awful lot that can be missed. So instead of having the second stage edited by also a native speaker who's also going to miss all the nuances and slang and things, it then goes back to a native speaker of the source language, so in our case, a Russian speaker, who doesn't edit it at all. They go through and make comments, and those comments then go to the translator, who gets to fix their own work. It becomes a virtuous cycle. So it's not a case of, here's your feedback file, look at the mistakes you made. It's a case of, this might be a mistake. What do you think? How about? And as a result, the whole process gets significantly better. I'm just going to briefly show you what it looks like. So this might be an example of mistranslation. The reviewer will categorize it. They'll say what kind of mistake it is. They'll explain what the actual mistake is. And then the last part will be the suggestion for how it can be fixed. Now, because they're not a native English speaker, they don't write it themselves, but they suggest what you could do in order to make it better. Same thing here, a bit of missed nuance. It was important that instead of just they poured in money, you know from the speaker's speech that it was a crazy amount of money, as in he thinks it's too much money. It's important that you add that nuance in because of what then happens in the rest of the scene. So the reviewer's picking it up, telling you what to do, and sometimes they disagree. That's fine if they have a reasoned way of arguing. I think I'm out of time. Yeah? Those are all just examples. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A fitting example of the moving images at the last minute there. Well, I'm very pleased that, for all the three presentations, we've managed to cover not just the special cases or examples, but also pointing into some of the difficulties and challenges lying ahead. You mentioned something happening yesterday in Russia with tax rebates and so on. Something also happened yesterday in Britain. Not quite the Brexit thing, still waiting for that, if it happens, but it was this bricked box that has been launched as from yesterday, which is also trying to compete with all this globalization and trying to get all the broadcasters in Britain all together and dealing with distribution that can compete with other companies and other giants in video on demand and so on. So that's the sort of area where we are moving into. We have now about 10 minutes for questions, and I would like to probably open up to the floor. And I know we've got here Konstantin.
So let me ask the first question. I beat Alexander to this today. Machine translation made its way into translation, and speech to text is making its way into subtitling. Many new tools already automatically transcribe videos. Do you guys use any speech-to-text tools when you do subtitles?
No. We have experimented. It was a few years ago now. We did experiment. it was too unreliable. One of the real problems is unless you're very trained and very disciplined in post-editing, it's very easy to look at it and say, well, that's nearly there, and move on. And so you end up with an awful lot of reasonably good, but not great. So we decided not to.
Pour nous, c'est sensiblement.
Well, for us, it's very much the same thing. As soon as it's working and it's more efficient or it helps the people who are doing their work, then we will use it. At the moment, the experiences we've had have been rather negative. The correction work and editing work is too great, but I think it's a question of time. I'm sure it'll come quite quickly. We just need to test it regularly. We don't want to have a dogmatic approach in one way or the other. You know, we've had experiences and it's not working quite yet, but you can't say that it never will work.
For us, the process is a bit different. We do the translation, and that translation then goes to the booth in the recording studio where the actors can say his or her lines, and even there are changes, because if the actor feels the line is not naturally spoken, they will still keep doing changes, so not there. We use it a bit for accessibility now, and we use it in the chat, and that would be it, and it's for English for the moment.
Any other questions from the floor? Quite a few hands. I think you were faster raising your hand, so and then we'll move.
In sectors such as the film industry and the video game industry, confidentiality is a key issue. And since some content has to stay undercover for months or years before actually being out there, how do you manage the context information that you have to give to translators so that they can do their job?
Yes, it's true. That's what I was saying, that we are not able to send the game builds because that product is highly confidential, and of course it's unannounced and you don't want the competitors to know, for example, about it. But we do have contracts, NDAs, with all our resources. What we do is we do a localization workshop before we start working, and we bring everybody on site to Ubisoft. They get to see the game as it is in that development stage. They get to play it a bit. They get to hear about the synopsis, about the characters, about the relationship between the characters, the style in which they speak, and all these. And we do provide them with context. It's just that they cannot check this line and see exactly the image in game. So it's more very specific context. They have the general context otherwise.
And then I think we had another question there. Yeah.
I wanted to ask the obvious question. Since the cinema and video game industries are so big and the ROI is so high, how come audiovisual translation is so poorly paid, and what can we do to change it?
Get better. I've heard since, my company is 10 years old, and since the first week of existing, I've constantly heard, why is it so expensive? It's too expensive. I hear that less these days, and we have some dedicated clients we've had for a long time. They just understand the cost, the real cost of bad translation. What can you do? Get better. Just be the best you can at it. And talk openly and freely with them about, what it takes for you to produce that great quality. I mentioned to some people I was talking to earlier, we had a big project that lasted a week every year repeatedly, and one of our freelancers put out 3 times the amount of translation that anyone else did in that time. And it was always basically flawless. It was incredible. So we said to her, share your secrets. What do you do? And she said, well, my husband takes the week off work to look after the children and the dog. I cook all the meals in advance, stick them in the freezer. That way I just defrost and go. I don't see anyone or talk to anyone for that week, and I make sure I get enough sleep, but not too much, so that I can work every hour there is. Fortunately, that's just 1 week of intense work, but that produces some amazing results, and we will always work with her. She's great. I'm not telling you who she is.
We try to be fair with our translators, and we work both with freelancers as well with the agencies, and they are long-term partners. And they will tell us if they feel that with a certain rate per word, they are not able to provide the quality that we expect, and we don't want them to jeopardize that. So we try to meet somewhere in the middle, so it's fair for them as well.
I'm going to try to pick up some of the questions that we have here in Slido, and a couple of them have been there for quite a bit. There is one a little bit agnostic on why, it's a third of the population plays video games. It's a bit hard to believe. Are these regular players? Is there something that you would know, Anca? Or?
For example, I don't know how many of you take into consideration mobile games, which the market is huge, and you see people on the way to work in public transportation playing. And another statistics that I want to mention is that about half of the video game enthusiasts, players, but not only those who watch esports, these tournaments where people compete in video games, half of them are women nowadays. So times have changed.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be surprised to hear, for instance, that probably 100% watch telly or watch audiovisual programs. So a third only doing video games, it seems to be a bit little. But anyway. And there was another question as well asking about the type of translators that you use at ARTE. Are they freelance or in-house? Would you mind to enlighten us a bit?
Pour ce qui est du service linguistique, donc le service...
When it comes to our language services, we tend to work 90% of the time with independent or freelance translators, because we have very specific needs, and so we cooperate with certain people, and some of them have been working for more than 20 years for us, and we only work with agencies when it comes to what we might call rarer languages. For us, we do work with other languages other than French and German and so on, and there we don't have the expertise, we don't have the contacts, and then that's when we go to use agencies. But I'm talking about my own parish, as it were, our own language services. We have good bilateral contacts with specific translators.
I think I'm sorry to say that the time is up for this presentation. I'd like to thank you again, my speakers, for really interesting presentations covering a wide range of topics. And thank you all as well for having chosen this session to be with us here today. Thank you.